friends. So my name is Skylar Vining. I'm a current student at Emporia State University, and I am in the class Intimate Violence as of fall 2020. And my book report is going to be on Charlie's Secret. So a brief overview of the book was that it was about intimate violence in a family setting. Charlie's Secret was a book that show the perspective of living in an abusive home from the point of view of a young girl named Sam. We follow the development of her relationships between her brother and her mother, starting with her in 7th grade and following her, jumping from 7th grade and following her from her senior year and so on. This book shows a really good explanation of the cycle of violence and perpetual violence. And how not treating trauma and anger ultimately leads to putting your abuse and your anger and pushing it onto someone else. So that is where a victim can be led to victimizing other people, as we see in a lot of bully situations. The whole perspective of this book follows how Sam is able to find the courage and try to break the perpetual cycle of abuse that her family has trapped her in. Something that really struck a chord with me was when Sam describes the abuse as a rippling effect, similar to skipping stones in a pond. She explains how one stone can cause so many ripples and damage the majesticness of a lake unless it is stopped. So she describes her ultimate battle with herself is whether she should keep Charlie's secret of him abusing others, such as herself, or if she should stop the ripple effect because he is the stone, and if she should stop that effect moving forward. One thing I'd like to point out is some key components mentioned a lot throughout the book. These would include the mom's ring she wears on her hand, hiding places such as the suitcase in Sam's closet, or downstairs in the basement she mentions a little spot where she hides a lot because she is small enough to fit. And also she mentions a lot of watching Charlie's hands and if they tense up or if they're relaxed. These few elements act as silencers to Sam whenever she thinks about speaking about her abuse, and she views these objects, such as when she was on the court stand going to testify against her brother's abuse against his girlfriend, and she sees her mom's rings. It pauses her in that moment because she thinks about that abuse, and these little things that we see, such as the suitcase and the rings, really show signs of PTSD, where wherever she sees them, she stops and she thinks about the trauma and the abuse that has come from those objects. Furthermore, we can also see that in a scene where her boyfriend Jake runs up the stairs behind her, Sam begins to get very tense and scared in the situation because that is where most of her attacks. Her brother has attacked her on the stairs a lot, so she has different areas like that where she is very shy and tense and worried, and she describes herself as hiding her face behind her hands or cowering away, getting into a fetal position because she is scared about what is to come next. We can see an instance of this when she is at her friend Jill's house and her brother walks into the room and starts, playfully fighting and having playful banter with his sister Jill, as a lot of siblings do, and Sam begins to get really worried because normally this taunting leads her brother Charlie to inflict physical violence on her. So we can see Sam turning red, cowering away, getting worried for her friend Jill, and even going as far as to jump in front of her brother, Jill's brother, and Jill, because she's afraid that conflict is going to ensue, and she wants to help alleviate the tension that is building in her eyes. And she later talks to Jill, why weren't you scared in that situation? Weren't you afraid that you were going to egg your brother on? And Jill was very confused, as most of us would be if a friend asked us why we weren't scared during our playful banter with our siblings. We can also see notes of Charlie throughout Sam throughout the book, trying to look at different things, such as when she went to her friend's house, she was thinking about like all the good hiding spots she could find, how Jill had so many brothers. Sam couldn't imagine surviving the abuse of all those brothers, and she is just stuck in her own little bubble of abuse and thinking that that is normal, that she doesn't realize that it's not normal. So that's why she's asking her friends these questions of why aren't you scared? Where are these hiding places at? How do you survive with all of these siblings? And it's quite interesting. One other thing I thought was pretty interesting was when, even though a lot of Sam's friends have harder living conditions compared to her, like her friend Jill, who has so many siblings that they don't really get much to eat, or her friend Bethany, who her parents have a lot of financial issues themselves, and their house has a weird smell and it's not that nice or up to date and the furniture's falling apart. But she talks about how jealous she is of these particular friends because they have families who love them and who care about them, and parents who are willing to hug them. And she just talks about how much she wished she had a life like that, despite how bad their living conditions are in comparison to hers. One of the biggest theories I see present in this book is the cycle of abuse, as I had mentioned previously. Sam and Charlie's mom are hinted to, their mom, Sam and Charlie's mom is hinted to have dealt with abuse in their past, which attempts to explain why she is abusive to her children now. So it's basically like a little momentum effect, where the mom was abused in her early childhood, so then she takes her anger out on Charlie. Charlie is angry and has a lot of aggression built up, so he takes his anger out on his sister. And what I can gather is it's really for the brother. I would say so for the mom too, but particularly for the brother, Charlie. We can see that when he takes his aggression out on Sam, a lot of it has to deal with insecurities in himself, and he really wants to assert dominance and prove to himself that, he is big, he is strong. One instance in particular where we can see Charlie's insecurities shining is in the scene when Sam, Charlie, and his girlfriend are all out at a bar together, and Charlie gets really upset when some guys come up and hit on his sister and his girlfriend. And in the car ride home, he really takes his anger out on his girlfriend. Why did you wear a low-cut shirt? This is your fault that someone hit on you. When, she didn't even have a chance to respond to the guys at the bar to tell them to go away. And she explains herself that had he given her time rather than just yanking her from the bar, she would have said, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. But she mentions that his insecurities and jealousy was the root of their current issue in the car and why he was being so angry, which angered him a lot. And as mentioned prior, Sam was starting to cower away in the back seat because she was feeling the vibe of the situation and realizing that this is turning into a dangerous situation for her. So that is one instance where we can also further prove that Charlie takes his anger out on people who are smaller than him because he is insecure in himself, which is a big motive for him. One thing that I also noticed is Charlie is very in the moment. His anger mixes with his insecurities, and this seems to be the core explanation for how he deals with his aggression and stress. However, on the flip, Sam is very level-headed and rational and thinks ahead to in the future and thinks, if I say these things to my mom or if I say these things to my brother, it will elicit an emotional response that I don't want to deal with. It will elicit them acting out in anger against me, so I will stray away from saying these words because it will not help the situation. So it really shows the maturity level and how Sam thinks, but it's very unfortunate because it really shows that Sam's mom and her brother have conditioned her into being complicit in not speaking her mind and really just trying to form her into a robot of sorts. Some forms of abuse present. This is the power and control wheel. We can see using coercion and threats. We can see the brother doing that a lot. There's many instances in the book where they talk about, him making this signal to his sister, or putting the fingers to the lips, telling him to be quiet. Also, as mentioned previously, the hands clenching into fists. We can see him using that as a sign to Sam, to tell her, don't do anything or you will regret it later. Using intimidation, we see that a lot too. He tells her in a lot of instances, don't do anything you won't regret, don't say anything you won't regret. We saw that in the car incident where he nearly crashes the car and he tells her, don't say anything you won't regret. And also in the court scene where he says, don't do anything you won't regret. They also use a lot of emotional abuse. They put her down a lot. One note here, making her feel ugly. They do that a lot. They talk about her appearance, how she eats. They really break down not only her emotional state, but her physical appearance as well, which she takes that a lot better than I would personally. But they use a lot of, I thought, I thought you would look prettier once you switched from glasses to contacts. Your hair is so frizzy. You eat so sloppy. This is why you don't have a boyfriend. Really tearing her down in that aspect and belittling her. They use isolation. We can see the mom using isolation tactics such as forcing her kids to go to their room as soon as, one sign of disrespect towards her, rather than trying to have a conversation with them. We can see a lot of incidences where the mom is blaming the kid and using isolation as a form of getting them to submit further. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. A statement that we hear a lot of in the book is, Sam, you're always making mountains out of molehills. We see her mom say that to her a lot, and Sam mentions how it really makes her feel guilty when her mom says that. For example, when she really wanted to shave her legs and her mom said, no, you're too young, and then her mom later comes into her room, throws the razor at her, and says, gosh, Sam, you always make mountains out of moleholes. And Sam instantly feels like, should I shave my legs? Because her mom is making her feel guilty while giving her the reward, which puts Sam and also Charlie in a precarious situation of, do I take what I want? Do I take the shaving my legs and then have her upset at me later, even though she offered it to me? Using children, we honestly don't really see this too much. The only instance that we really see this is when the mom uses family to Sam in the courtroom setting, where she says, you need to keep this family together and not tear us apart. You need to protect us. If you testify, if you say one wrong thing against Charlie in this situation, you're ruining our family. So I would, instead of using children, I would say that would be using family as a dynamic to try to keep Sam at bay, because Sam's worst fear is having her family disappointed in her and having them get in trouble. Using male privilege, we see a lot of situations where, especially in the car scene, as I mentioned prior, where Charlie says to his girlfriend, if you didn't wear that low-cut shirt, if you didn't do this, very much asserting, because of your womanhood is the reason why you are getting abused, because you are a slut, you are a B-word, as he liked to say to her a lot in that situation, to say that it was her fault, she was being slutty, she caused this abuse on herself. And then also, lastly, I would say using economic abuse. I did not see this as present in the book. However, we do know that Sam's parents didn't really help her out with finances a lot. So the sense of knowing that she didn't have the option to go to college planted her in staying home. She had no financial resources to move out of the house. She had no way to go to college. She didn't really have much money on her own. So I don't see it as present as the other control dynamics, but I do think that there was a little bit of aspect of, because they lacked funding her as much as they funded Charlie, it planted her in her abusive setting the most. Sam ended up getting out of her abusive home by moving out after she testifies against her brother in the courtroom. One thing that I found really interesting is Sam didn't really get law enforcement involved in her own personal abuse. She really cared about her relationship with her family, and she didn't want to see them get in any sorts of trouble. So she did get out with the help of Bethany, but she didn't involve any legalistic forms. Yeah, those are my takeaways of this book. I went ahead and looked at the second book, and it's really sad this poor girl can't get a break, because in the second book she's abused further by her husband in the situation. However, it is really interesting to see how the author described how different people deal with stressful situations, and how they deal with it can turn into abuse, such as the brother dealing with his stress by taking it out on people who were weaker than him, or the mother asserting her dominance over her children and gaslighting them and manipulating them into feeling bad for her mom. I noticed her mom using a lot more emotional abuse, where Charlie used a lot of physical abuse, and Sam, when she was in stress, noticed that she tried to be a people pleaser and make whatever that person in stress was happiest with most as the outcome. So overall, pretty good book, and I was thankful to have read it for this class.